She had a full cup of Coke dumped over her head just because she said, "I think this hiring process is unfair." Someone sneered, "You sound like one of those protest ladies," then splashed soda across her face. The room erupted in laughter. Some even recorded it like a joke. But no one knew that quiet woman was the CEO's wife and the person holding the key to saving the entire company from a global scandal. Until the doors burst open and the most powerful man in the company walked in and said the two words that silenced everyone. My wife. Rachel Moore stood at the edge of the bustling check-in area, her plain white blouse tucked neatly into beige trousers, her old sneakers scuffed from years of use. Her brown hair was tied low, not a strand out of place, and she carried a single sheet of paper, her resume, along with a worn-out pen that clicked softly in her hand. The headquarters of Nexlify Tech in New York was a fortress of glass and steel, its lobby filled with the hum of ambition. Hundreds of candidates milled about their tailored suits and polished heels clicking against the marble floor. Rachel at 28 looked out of place, her face bare of makeup, her posture calm but unassuming. People glanced at her, then looked away, assuming she was nobody. A young guy in a flashy tie bumped past her, muttering, "Watch it," without a second thought. She stepped aside, her eyes steady, and adjusted her grip on the resume, the paper's edges slightly curled from being held too long. "Hey, before we go deeper, can you do me a quick favor? Grab your phone, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. It means the world to share a story like this, and I want to know you're out there feeling it with me." Just a small pause to connect, then we're right back in. The receptionist at the check-in table, a woman with sharp red nails and a tight smile, barely looked up as Rachel approached. Her name tag read Kelsey, and her eyes flicked over Rachel's outfit, lingering on the sneakers. "Oh, are you the cleaning temp for the testing area?" Kelsey asked, her voice dripping with assumption. Rachel's fingers paused on her resume, but her face stayed calm. "I'm a candidate," she said, her tone even. Kelsey's smile froze her nails, tapping the table. "Right," she said, waving a hand toward a row of plastic chairs along the wall. "Sit over there. You'll be called, eventually." A nearby candidate, a guy with gelled hair and a leather briefcase, snickered, leaning toward his friend. "Cleaning temp." "Nailed it," he muttered loud enough for Rachel to hear. She walked to the chairs, her sneakers soft on the floor, and sat down, her resume flat on her lap, her pen still clicking faintly. Rachel waited in the lobby, her pen resting on her resume, when a candidate named Vanessa with glossy lipstick and a designer scarf strutted by. Vanessa paused, her scarf fluttering, and dropped her empty water bottle onto Rachel's lap. "Since you're sitting there doing nothing," she said, her voice loud enough to draw eyes, "toss this for me, would you?" Her friends, a pair of women in matching blazers, giggled, one snapping a photo. Rachel's hand froze the bottle cold against her trousers, but her face remained steady. She stood, walked to the nearest bin, and dropped the bottle in the plastic, clinking loudly. "Your manners need more work than your aim," she said, her voice low but sharp. Vanessa's lipstick smile faltered, her scarf suddenly limp, but Rachel was already back in her seat, her pen clicking once more, her gaze fixed on the distant skyline. A junior HR assistant named Liam, sorting candidate files behind a glass partition, paused as he pulled Rachel's resume from the stack. His eyes widened, scanning the page, and he leaned toward a colleague, his voice low. "This says Rachel Moore negotiated peace-building contracts in the Middle East," he said, his pen circling her name. "Why's she still waiting?" His colleague, a guy with a smartwatch, shrugged. "Probably a typo," he said, but Liam shook his head, slipping the resume into a priority folder. Rachel, still seated in the lobby, didn't see this, her fingers smoothing the edge of her own copy, her sneakers tapping faintly against the marble floor. A nearby candidate overheard Liam's whisper, her notepad pausing, her eyes darting toward Rachel with a mix of curiosity and doubt. Hours dragged by in the lobby, the air thick with cologne and nervous chatter. Rachel sat quietly, her posture straight, watching as candidates were called in groups, their names echoing over the PA system. A woman in a designer blazer, her heels clacking, strutted past, tossing a coffee cup into a trash bin near Rachel, missing it entirely. The cup rolled to Rachel's feet, and the woman glanced back, smirking. "Pick that up, would you?" she said, her voice laced with condescension. Rachel's hand tightened on her pen, but she leaned down, grabbed the cup, and dropped it into the bin without a word. The woman's smirk widened, and she turned to her friend, a guy in a pinstripe suit. "Bet she's used to that," she said, laughing. Rachel's eyes flicked up, meeting the woman's for a brief moment, then returned to her resume. Her face unchanged, her fingers steady. Rachel was refilling her water bottle at a lobby fountain when a candidate named Derek with a loud tie and a smug grin leaned against the wall nearby. "Hey, budget girl," he called loud enough for others to turn. He flicked a crumpled sticky note at her, watching it land in her open bag. "Since you're so good at cleaning, keep that safe for me," he said, his friends chuckling. Rachel's hand paused on the fountain water dripping onto her sleeve, but her face stayed calm. She fished the note from her bag, dropped it into a nearby bin, and met Derek's gaze. "Your trash belongs with you," she said, her voice cutting through the laughter. Derek's tie seemed louder, his grin faltering, but Rachel turned away, her bag strap creaking, her water bottle now full. A recruiter named Marcus with a rumpled tie and a stack of resumes shuffled through papers in a side office, his voice carrying through the open door. "Wait, hold up," he said, pausing on one sheet. "Led post-conflict reconstruction in Syria and Laos. Masters from Oxford. What the hell? Why hasn't this Rachel Moore been interviewed?" His colleague, a senior recruiter named Diane with a sleek bob and a skeptical frown, snorted. "Probably fake," she said, sipping her latte. "Nobody like that walks in here looking like her. Let her in for fun, though." Marcus hesitated, his pen hovering, then nodded. "Fine call, her next round," he said. Diane rolled her eyes, muttering waste of time. Rachel, still seated in the lobby, didn't hear them, but her pen stopped clicking, her gaze fixed on a distant window where the city's skyline gleamed under a gray sky. An older HR coordinator named Patricia with a stack of old folders approached Marcus after overhearing his conversation. She held out a faded conference badge, her hands trembling slightly. "I found this in the archives," she said quietly. The badge read Rachel Moore Keynote Speaker Global Reconstruction Summit 2019. Patricia's eyes softened, her voice low. "She presented alongside UN delegates." Marcus's rumpled tie shifted as he took the badge, his jaw tight. Rachel, still waiting in the lobby, adjusted her blouse, unaware of the discovery, her fingers brushing a small keychain in her bag, a gift from Ethan engraved with a tiny desert star. A nearby candidate noticed Patricia's hushed tone, her phone pausing mid-scroll, her eyes narrowing at Rachel. Rachel's name finally crackled over the PA, and she stood smoothing her blouse as she walked toward the interview room. The hallway was lined with candidates, some whispering, others scrolling on their phones. A guy in a tailored vest, his smartwatch glinting, glanced at her and scoffed. "They're letting anyone in now," he said to his friend, a woman with diamond earrings. "Look at her resume paper." "What is this, 1995? The woman laughed, her earrings catching the light. Rachel's steps didn't falter, but her fingers brushed the edge of her resume, the paper crinkling faintly. She entered the interview room, a stark space with a long table and 5 recruiters, their laptops open. Diane, the senior recruiter, leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing as Rachel sat down. "So," Diane said, her voice clipped, "you're the one with the fancy resume? Let's see if you're for real." During a break in the interview session, Rachel stepped into a quiet corner to adjust her bag, her resume tucked inside. A candidate named Lauren with a sharp ponytail and a designer purse approached her heels, clicking loudly. "You're taking up space," she said, her voice carrying to nearby candidates. She grabbed Rachel's bag and tossed it onto the floor, scattering a few papers. "Stick to the sidelines. Nobody," she added, her friend snickering. Rachel's hands shook as she knelt to gather her papers, her glasses slipping slightly, but her face stayed calm. She stood clutching her bag and met Lauren's gaze. "Your push doesn't move me," she said, her voice steady. Lauren's ponytail flicked, her purse suddenly heavy as Rachel walked away, her papers neatly tucked back in place. The group interview began, a tense mix of questions and rapid-fire tests. Rachel answered calmly, her voice clear, her hands folded on the table. Other candidates interrupted, their voices loud, their answers polished. A guy named Trevor with a Harvard tie and a smug grin was fast-tracked to the next round despite skipping the written test. Rachel's pen resting on her resume twitched slightly. She raised her hand, her movement deliberate. "Excuse me," she said, her tone steady, "but I believe this process hasn't been fair. Some of us completed the test seriously." The room went quiet. Diane's latte cup froze mid-sip. Trevor laughed, his tie bobbing. "Who do you think you are questioning us?" he said. A woman named Claire with a fake smile and a glittery phone case shook a Coke can playfully. "Sounds like one of those protesters," she sneered, then popped the tab and poured the soda over Rachel's head. Sticky liquid dripped down Rachel's face, soaking her blouse, pooling on the table. The room erupted in laughter, Claire's phone already recording, her glittery case flashing. Trevor clapped his grin wide. "That's what you get for whining," he said. Diane smirked, her laptop screen reflecting the chaos. Rachel sat unmoving, her hands still folded, soda trickling onto her resume. Her glasses fogged slightly, but her face stayed calm. She reached for a tissue from her bag, her movements slow, and wiped her face, the paper smudging brown. A guy named Greg with a cheap suit and a nervous laugh hesitated, his hand twitching toward a napkin, but Claire's glare stopped him. Rachel's eyes flicked to Greg, then back to the table, her tissue crumpling in her hand. She said nothing, her silence heavier than the laughter. A senior translator named Omar, who'd been observing from the back, slipped a small folded note to Richard as the chaos settled. The note, torn from a conference program, listed Rachel as a lead mediator for a Middle East peace initiative. Omar's hands were steady, his eyes sharp. "She's not just a candidate," he whispered. Richard's face tightened, his suit jacket creasing as he clutched the note. Rachel, still seated, adjusted her glasses, unaware of the exchange, her tissue now a tight ball in her fist. Claire, still holding her phone, didn't notice Omar's move, but Greg's nervous laugh faltered, his eyes darting to the note in Richard's hand. The door burst open, and a senior HR executive named Richard with gray hair and a sharp suit stepped in. His eyes widened, landing on Rachel. "Ms. Moore," he said, his voice tight. "Oh my God, who did this?" He turned, his face red, and shouted, "Who was assigned to interview her? Are you insane?" "She was personally referred by the CEO." The laughter died. Claire's phone slipped clattering to the table. Trevor's tie seemed to choke him, his grin gone. Diane's latte cup shook, spilling onto her laptop. Rachel stood, her blouse clinging to her skin, and reached for her bag, her movements precise. "I'll need a moment," she said, her voice steady, and walked out, soda still dripping from her hair, leaving the room in stunned silence. Rachel returned an hour later, her hair damp but neat, wearing a spare blouse from her bag, plain gray, slightly wrinkled. The interview room had cleared out, but whispers followed her down the hallway. A director named Paul with a gold watch and a thin mustache leaned toward a colleague as she passed. "So she's the CEO's girl," he whispered loud enough for her to hear. "Doesn't mean she's qualified." His colleague, a woman named Sylvia with a pearl necklace, sneered. "Bet she staged the whole soda stunt to play the victim," she said, her voice carrying. Rachel's step paused, her bag strap creaking in her grip, but she kept walking, her sneakers soft on the carpet. A nearby intern clutching a tablet glanced up, his eyes wide but said nothing, his fingers frozen on the screen. As Rachel walked toward the presentation room, a junior exec named Natalie with a loud laugh and a flashy ring blocked her path in the hallway. "You're not fooling anyone," Natalie said, her voice echoing off the glass walls. She snatched Rachel's notebook from her hands and tossed it into a nearby trash bin. "Go back to fetching coffee," she taunted, her ring glinting as her friends laughed. Rachel's hands clenched, her glasses catching the light, but she calmly retrieved her notebook, brushing off a coffee stain. "Your hands don't erase my work," she said, her voice low. Natalie's laugh stopped, her ring suddenly dull as Rachel continued down the hall, her notebook tucked tightly under her arm. A meeting room buzzed with tension as Rachel was called in for an internal presentation. No one expected her to be there, let alone invited to speak. She stood at the front, her gray blouse tucked neatly, her resume replaced by a single notebook. With a steady hand, she sketched a CSR recovery roadmap on the whiteboard, a plan to rebuild Nexlify's image after a recent data breach scandal. Her voice was calm, her points precise, detailing community outreach, transparency measures, and global partnerships. A senior advisor named Helen with a sharp blazer and a stunned expression leaned forward. "She just solved what we've been stuck on for 3 months, she whispered to her colleague. Rachel's pen paused, her eyes flicking to Helen, then back to the board, her notebook closing with a soft snap. During a coffee break after the presentation, a facilities manager named Carla, with a clipboard and a cruel smirk, spotted Rachel refilling her water bottle. "Hey, Temp," she called loud enough to turn heads. She knocked Rachel's bottle from her hand, splashing water across her blouse. "You're better at mopping than speaking," she said, her clipboard slapping her thigh as her colleagues laughed. Rachel's hands shook as she picked up the bottle, water dripping from her fingers, but her face stayed calm. She refilled it, met Carla's gaze, and said, "Your spill doesn't stop me." Carla's smirk wavered, her clipboard slipping as Rachel walked away, her blouse damp but her stride steady. An IT specialist named Sanjay, who'd been quietly monitoring the presentation, approached Helen afterward holding a USB drive. "I found this in the old project archives," he said, his voice low. It contained a video of Rachel leading a reconstruction workshop in Laos, her voice commanding a room of diplomats. Sanjay's eyes were steady, his hands firm. "She's the real deal," he said. Helen's blazer tightened as she took the drive, her jaw set. Rachel, now in the hallway, adjusted her bag, unaware of the discovery, her fingers brushing the Desert Star keychain again. A nearby candidate overheard Sanjay, her coffee cup pausing, her eyes widening at Rachel's retreating figure. Paul, the director with the gold watch, stood in the hallway after the presentation, his voice low but sharp. "She's still not one of us," he said to Sylvia, the pearl necklace woman. "No Harvard degree, no connections. Just some sob story." Sylvia nodded, her necklace clinking. "Bet she's only here because of him," she said, her eyes darting toward Rachel, who was packing her notebook nearby. Rachel's fingers stilled, her bag half-zipped, but her face stayed calm. She zipped her bag, her movements deliberate, and walked past them, her sneakers quiet. A nearby clerk, sorting files, overheard and paused, her pen hovering, her eyes following Rachel's steady stride. A board meeting convened that afternoon, the room heavy with leather chairs and polished wood. Rachel sat at the far end, her notebook closed, her pen resting beside it. A female board member named Marjorie with a tight bun and a diamond brooch leaned forward, her voice cold. "I vote no," she said. "She doesn't have the right background like our Harvard consultants. She doesn't belong here." Murmurs rippled through the room, a few heads nodding. Paul's gold watch glinted as he smirked. Rachel's hands stayed folded, her glasses catching the light, her face unchanged. She adjusted her pen, aligning it with her notebook, her movement precise, her silence louder than Marjorie's words. A senior consultant named Aisha, who'd been silent during the board meeting, slipped a small, embossed card to Ethan as the murmurs died down. The card from a UN Gala thanked Rachel Moore for her role in securing a global aid package. Aisha's hands were calm, her eyes sharp. "She's done more than anyone here," she whispered. Ethan's suit jacket shifted as he pocketed the card, his jaw tight. Rachel, still seated, adjusted her glasses, unaware of the exchange, her pen now perfectly aligned with her notebook. Marjorie's brooch glinted, but her hands trembled, her eyes avoiding Aisha's steady gaze. The boardroom doors swung open and Ethan Blackwell stepped in his dark suit, crisp, his presence commanding. The CEO's eyes scanned the room, landing on Rachel, then moving to Marjorie. "Everyone has the right to evaluate," he said, his voice sharp but controlled. "But no one has the right to humiliate her." He walked to Rachel's side, his steps deliberate, and said clearly, "Rachel Moore is my wife. And she's the one who rewrote the entire CSR proposal we're about to present to the United Nations." The room froze. Marjorie's brooch seemed to pin her in place, her face pale. Paul's watch stopped ticking, his smirk gone. Rachel stood, her notebook in hand, her eyes calm, her posture steady beside Ethan. Marjorie's hand shook as she gathered her papers, her tight bun unraveling slightly. Paul's gold watch caught the light, but his face was ashen, his smirk replaced by a nervous twitch. Sylvia's pearl necklace clinked as she shifted, her eyes darting away from Rachel. The boardroom emptied, the murmurs now hushed, the air thick with unspoken regret. Rachel walked to the door, her sneakers soft, her notebook tucked under her arm. Ethan held the door, his hand brushing hers briefly, a quiet gesture no one else noticed. She stepped into the hallway, her hair dry, her gray blouse neat, her presence shifting the space around her. The next day, Claire, the woman with the glittery phone case, was called into HR. Her termination letter was brief, citing unprofessional conduct. She left the building, her phone now silent, her glittery case tucked into a box of personal items. Social media buzzed with screenshots of her video, the comments tearing her apart. Who pours soda on someone? One post read, racking up thousands of likes. Claire's LinkedIn profile went dark, her job applications unanswered. Rachel didn't see the posts, didn't read the comments. She was already in a new office, her notebook open, her pen clicking softly as she drafted a community outreach plan. Diane, the senior recruiter, faced an internal investigation. Her laptop, still stained with latte, was confiscated, her emails revealing a pattern of favoritism. The HR team was disbanded, its members reassigned or let go. Diane's sleek bob lost its shine, her latte cups replaced by cheap office coffee as she scrambled to explain herself. Trevor, the Harvard Thai guy, lost his fast-tracked offer, his smug grin fading as he reapplied to lesser firms. Greg, the nervous guy in the cheap suit, stayed quiet, his hesitation in the interview room haunting him. He kept his job, but his eyes avoided Rachel in the hallways, his napkin gesture never forgotten. Rachel's appointment as Global Director of Community Strategy was announced in a company-wide email. The news landed like a quiet thunderclap, shifting whispers to silence. Employees who'd smirked in the lobby now nodded respectfully as she passed. Her office, a modest space with a single window, held her notebook, her pen, and a small photo of her and Ethan, a candid shot from years ago, their smiles soft, a desert sunset behind them. She glanced at it, sometimes her fingers brushing the frame, then returned to her work, her pen moving steadily across the page. Paul's gold watch no longer glinted in board meetings. His role was reduced, his influence eroded. Sylvia's pearl necklace appeared less often, her social circle shrinking as colleagues distanced themselves. Marjorie's diamond brooch stayed pinned to her blazer, but her voice carried less weight, her objections ignored. The board's dynamics shifted, Rachel's roadmap now guiding their strategy. She didn't attend every meeting, didn't need to. Her proposals delivered and her calm, clear voice spoke for her, their impact undeniable. A week later, Rachel stood in the VIP elevator, her gray blouse replaced by a simple navy blazer, her sneakers swapped for plain flats. Ethan stood beside her, his suit sharp, his hand resting lightly on her arm. The elevator hummed, its mirrored walls reflecting their quiet strength. No one else rode with them, the space was theirs. A faint ding sounded as the doors opened, revealing the executive floor now hushed in their presence. Rachel stepped out, her notebook under her arm, her eyes calm, her stride steady. Employees in the lobby glanced up as Rachel passed their coffee cups, pausing mid-sip. The clerk who'd overheard Paul's whispers now smiled faintly, her pen moving again. The intern with the tablet typed quickly, his eyes bright with respect. Rachel didn't notice, didn't stop. She walked through the glass doors, the city's skyline stretching beyond her flats, silent on the marble. The woman once mistaken for a temp drenched in soda now carried a presence that shifted rooms, her silence a power no one dared challenge. Rachel's roadmap rolled out globally, rebuilding Nexlify's trust one community at a time. News articles praised her strategy, though she avoided interviews her name enough to carry the story. The UN presentation delivered by Ethan with Rachel at his side earned a standing ovation, her notebook's pages now a blueprint for change. She didn't smile for the cameras, didn't pose. She stood, her blazer neat, her eyes steady, her work speaking louder than any speech. Late one evening, Rachel paused by her office window, the city lights flickering below. Her notebook lay open, her pen resting beside it, the photo of her and Ethan catching the glow. She touched the frame, her fingers lingering, then turned back to her desk, her flats quiet on the carpet. The woman who'd been underestimated, mocked, and drenched in soda had walked through it all. Her dignity unshaken, her truth now undeniable. Her pain wasn't loud, but it was real. Her strength wasn't flashy, but it changed everything. She stood where others fell, not because she fought louder, but because she never stopped walking. And for anyone who's ever been looked down on, her story says, you're still here. You're enough. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally, healing.